Hello, this is Joe Simhart. This is my third talk regarding cults in the occulture. And this time I'm going to concentrate on something that has to do with this hat. It's Make America Great Again in Russian. About 100 years ago, there was an effort to not only make America great again by a Russian, but to make the whole world great again. So I'm going to remove this for now. And the Russian that we're going to be talking about, in fact, it's a couple, Nicholas and Helena Roerich, were the founders of something called the Agni Yoga Society. And this was the fourth book in their channeled series called Agni Yoga. The third one was called New Community or New Era Community. So we're going to look at who this was and why I became interested in him. Again, this is another picture of him, a painting of Nicholas Roerich done by his son Svetslav, who was a famous painter and married to one of the most famous actresses in India. And here's Roerich in his classic Tibetan type of costume in the Himalaya, looking sage-like with his long white beard. So he was a painter and a mystic, quite influential in some ways. As I mentioned all along here, I'm referring to my memoir again, Santa Fe, Bill Tate and Me. And in here, I talk about me coming into Bill Tate's gallery, and in there I found Manly P. Hall's Secret Teachings of All Ages, but also the same day, first day I was in there in 1975, I found this 1974 edition of American Artist. And on the cover is Glory to the Hero, a painting by Nicholas Roerich. Well, I've never heard of this painter before. And, you know, I was in Santa Fe seeking a direction as an artist. I had just left the Pennsylvania Academy. And I was looking for some guidance, a hero system, if you will, some school of thought. And I read this article that night in American Artist Magazine, and I was enthralled. I mean, this guy I'd never heard of. He was an interesting painter. He did quite a few paintings of the Himalaya. This is one of his most famous, of Kanchenjunga, the third highest peak in the world. And then he also did spiritual paintings, like this one of the Divine Mother, and so on. He was quite prolific. He did around 7,000 paintings. Most of them were mountain studies. But he developed a cult following under his Agni Yoga teachings. And the teachings mainly came through his wife, Helena Roerich. She channeled the work, and after studying Theosophy as expounded by Helena Blavatsky, a fellow Russian woman, and Helena Roerich translated the Secret Doctrine, which is no easy feat, into Russian. So the Roerichs came to the United States in 1920, about the time they to Santa Fe, New Mexico in 1920. And visited out there. I had gotten to know a woman when I moved there, an older lady whose father, William Penhallow Henderson, was quite famous and knew many people. He did a portrait of Rabindranath Tagore, for instance. And I think it was Tagore that referred the Roerichs to him. He visited the Hendersons. And when Alice was about 11 years old, I found out in 1980 or so, she met the Roerichs. And anyway, there's a lot more to this history, but what I want to get into here is Roerich's influence on the United States. He set up a society in New York. Louis Horch, a great land developer, his wife, where they were followers of Roerich, and they built something called the Master Institute at 103rd and Riverside. I think it's about a 29-story building. And it went up around the late 20s, a skyscraper, still there. Now it's an apartment building. But the first 3 floors were called the Master Institute, all dedicated to Roerich and the idea of culture. and what Roerich called the Pax Cultura. And this is a little card they put out, the Roerich Museum. Roerich endeared himself to many people in high society, a lot of theosophists and people interested in the theosophical teachings. One of them was Henry Wallace, the Secretary of Agriculture under FDR, under the Roosevelt administration. And Wallace became a devotee of Roerich to the extent that they had personal communication. Some of the history of Henry Wallace and Roerich is documented quite thoroughly in this book. Here, it's called The Great Game and the Race for Empire in Central Asia, Tournament of Shadows by Meyer and Brysack. It's really a good historical read, but there's quite a bit of information on how Roerich influenced the United States, and Henry Wallace especially. When Henry Wallace ran for president after Roosevelt under the Progressive Party, he was embarrassed by investigative reporters that found these communications between Wallace and Roerich, called the Guru Letters, and it was exposed, and there was a lot of flowery theosophical language in them that only inside people could understand. For instance, there was code words calling Roosevelt the Eagle, and that kind of thing, kind of droppings of esoteric language, and that helped to diminish Wallace's prestige in the public, and anyway, he didn't get the nomination or the election. So anyway, this thing, the Great Game, is interesting. This is the Great Game is about gaining influence in the Middle East and especially Afghanistan among Russia, India, United States, and especially England. And this thing has been going on and is going on still today. So this Great Game still exists. And you see Russian influence trying to, for instance, peddle some kind of control over what happens in Iran and that kind of thing. So, you know, as time went on, I found out about this group, Church Universal and Triumphant, that was combining the I Am teachings, which I had been exposed to already, and the Roerich teachings, the Agni Yoga teachings, in their particular school called Summit University. And I got curious about it, and I went out, and that's how I got caught up in that cult. I went to 3 of their conferences. What intrigued me at the time was that the claim of the leaders was that their younger daughter, Tatiana, was the reincarnation of Helena Roerich. And the Agni Yoga teachings were being taught at the highest level of Summit University, and I had already read them. And so I figured, well, I was already in a way. So it kind of was a wide open door for me to invite myself into that particular form of influence. I'd like to mention that the Agni Yoga people at the Agni Yoga Society in New York, including Sina Fosdick, who was the director at the time, I got to know her, never pressured me to join. I was self-invited. I was attracted to the transcendence of the organization, and I kind of walked in. They never said anything to me when I quit or stopped communicating with them. I was never part of the society, but I did favor it for approximately 7 years, up until 1982. What's interesting, what happened in 1982 was I met a photographer in New York at the Roerich Museum, and we got talking. We and I was sort of backing away from Theosophy at the time anyway, and he told me about this relatively new book that came out, Russian Art and American Money. It's written by Robert Williams, and he's looking at the period between 1900 and 1940, and of course there's a large chapter here, extensive chapter on Roerich and who he was involved with. This book came out in 1980, by the way. And what was going on with him? Well, I learned that Roerich, the United States government, with Wallace's help, sent Roerich and a team of scientists out to Mongolia and to the Far East to try to find seeds and plants that would grow in the American Southwest in dry desert kind of climates, because they were having this Dust Bowl thing going on there that they wanted to prevent again. Roerich went over there with the scientists. He had some knowledge of Russia, obviously, and Mongolia. But the scientists began to complain about Roerich because all he was interested in was the spiritual stuff going on over there, and traveled away from them. It wasn't really helpful at all. Didn't seem to know a damn thing about seeds. So the U.S. government in 1936 soured on Roerich, and they did a research, and they found out that he was not paying taxes on sales or money he was getting from wealthy people here. The Roerich end of the argument says that he didn't do that he was set up. Anyway, he was banned from coming back into the United States after 1936. So he set up a commune of sorts up in northern Ladakh area, and it was called Urusvati, and that's more or less where he ended his final days. He also endeared himself to the Russian government after 1936, and in fact, I remember where he told them that he felt that Nikolai Lenin was a Mahatma, meaning a great soul, kind of like Moria and Saint Germain and all these characters that are behind the White Brotherhood and all of that. So, as a result, the Russian people have embraced Agni Yoga, especially since Perestroika. In 1989, the leaders, Gorbachev and his wife Riza, were supporters of Agni Yoga, and Riza was kind of a devotee of it, and they set up a center in Russia. The Russian church wasn't too happy about it, the Orthodox church, but anyway, 3 million Russians are devotees of Agni Yoga today, and this was researched quite thoroughly in a book that came out in 2005 by a Latvian scholar, Anita Stasilani, called Theosophy and Culture, Nicholas Roerich. Now, I reviewed this book. It's very well researched. It doesn't condemn the group, but it does bring up the criticisms of it. And it explains the teachings about its desire to get into cosmic unity, to unify culture around the world, to protect beauty. I mean, one of the slogans of Agni Yoga was regarding beauty. They really emphasized it. There's also a lot of strange teachings in it, which is borrowed from Theosophy. There were some odd things I learned. For instance, Helena Roerich believed that pine trees have a special spiritual agency, and that if you're around them, you will gain this psychic energy. And what they meant by psychic energy was this vital force in the universe that could give you health and all the stuff that New Thought tells you can come through the power of the mind. But that's just a small idea of what they were teaching. Roerich, of course, was controversial in his day, and even among his fellow Russian artists. I mean, they didn't like him very much because they saw him as a poseur. In other words, somebody posing as something he was not, which was this great Mahatma kind of a creature. In 1985, the LA County Museum put on a landmark show called The Spiritual in Art, Abstract Painting from 1890 to 1985. And this is the 450-page catalog that they put out with lots of scholarly articles in it. And you would think that Roerich would be included in this because his paintings were quite spiritual. He's not in the show. He is mentioned, however, in here, and it does mention that he wasn't regarded very highly among his Russian peers, and for this reason, more because of his personality. I mean, his paintings are good. They're interesting. Some people really love them, and he's influenced a lot of artists, including me at one time. Now, let me show you this. In May of 1980, I did this painting. If you can see it on the bottom behind the rabbit hole thing, it's of a figure in white standing at early dawn in the mountains, kind of in imitation of the Roerich style. It's the last painting I did like that, and it's the only one I have left. Again, it was toward the end of my valuing of Theosophy in 1980. So I'm going to mention one more artist. Her name is Agnes Pelton. She lived from 1881 to 1961, and she has recently gained incredible favor and value in terms of her work, with a few exhibitions going on. In this Wall Street Journal article that came out in September 10th, 2020, Arts in Review, with one of Pelton's paintings here. And it says that Pelton was quite influenced by people like Mabel Dodge Lujan, was into this esoteric stuff and the occulture, as I've been calling it. But she was also influenced particularly by the occult, Theosophy, and Agni Yoga, it says in this article. It's interesting when people hear Agni Yoga. Agni means fire in Sanskrit, and it has many layers of meaning, including the god of fire, Agni, which you can pray to. There's the Agnihotra ceremony, which is very popular throughout India, even today. At sunrise, and there's certain rituals that you do to worship Agni, the sun. Agni also represents wisdom in its highest form, so you can understand why theosophists might gravitate toward Agni. And yoga, in this sense, means union or yoking with that highest wisdom, the highest wisdom that's available to human beings. It has an interesting backstory. It's very complex in many ways, kind of mystical, and therefore the language is abstruse and dense. You almost have to use an intuitive self to begin to understand it. I mean, believe me, it's very strange if you've never read it before. But anyway, I rejected this as a way rejected it as a hero system for me in the arts, including Nicholas Roerich. So I think that's about all I'd like to say about that right now, just as an introduction to this other aspect of my life, and as part of the occulture and one more of the cults that entered it. Now, I'd like to say that I hadn't seen much done in terms of research on Agni Yoga by the so-called experts on new religions among sociologists. It was never mentioned in their volumes that I could see in the 1980s and 90s, but lately they've been recognizing it a little bit more. All right, well, thank you for listening. I hope you learned something, and I think I'm going to be talking about shamanism in my next talk. So thank you for listening. Bye-bye.